Well, after a brief break, we return to our series in Ecclesiastes. If you've been following along, Ecclesiastes is a book that tries to help us make sense out of life in what the author refers to as life under the sun. Ecclesiastes is a book that is refreshingly honest. And it's a unique book as we're not given easy answers. The writer of Ecclesiastes isn't concerned with pie in the sky, positive thinking, but rather takes the time to wrestle with the difficulties and complexities of life, the things that are hard and just don't seem right about this world. But nevertheless, throughout the book, despite its unflinching look at the difficulties of life, there's these moments that at times can almost catch you off guard, where the writer of Ecclesiastes, after wrestling through with a particularly difficult part of life, will encourage us to pursue our joy, pursue joy in our lives, and kind of left scratching our head going, well, how do I do that? How do I do this joy thing in light of life's difficulties? We all want to live lives of joy, but the challenging part is figuring out how, in fact, to go about doing that. Joy can be so elusive at times, can't it? We want it, but it can just seem out of our reach. But I tell you, the one I want to get advice from on how to pursue joy is the one that recognizes the challenges behind it and has thought through these challenges, who's not giving empty platitudes. You know, there's enough of those online to go around. And that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes has done here this morning as we look in this text. He's considered the challenge, and he doesn't gloss over it, and yet he still points us to a life of joy in our text today. A joy that is not only possible, but we'll see in our text is actually commanded by a good Father. The title of this morning's message is Everyday Joy for Everyday Life. And we want to look at three sections of our text this morning, 3 points. So first, we want to look at the challenge of joy, what stands in our way from experiencing the joy of this text. Then we want to look at the confidence of joy, what gives us hope that this joy can actually be ours. And finally, we want to look at the command of joy. What is this picture of the joyful life that the writer of Ecclesiastes points us to, and that God is calling for us to live out? So let's look first at point 1, the challenge of joy. In verse 1 of our text, the author reflects on how he set out on an assignment to examine the way God deals with his people. He says, "But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God." And he says, as he reflects on this and as he ponders and examines this, that a problem emerges that he starts to struggle with. What he notices is that whether someone lives for God or not, you can't tell by what happens to that person. You can run the highlight reel of somebody's life, all the milestones, when they were born, when they going through their childhood, the promotion at work, their new house, the new career, sickness, ultimately their death. And what he observes is that we can have no way of knowing how that person lived by what happens to them. We can have no way of knowing this person's relationship to God. It says in verse 1, whether it's love or hate, man doesn't know. Both are before him. In other words, he's saying you can't tell whether God is for someone or against someone simply by observing what happens to that person. Good things that would appear to be love, or bad things that would appear to be hate or God being against someone, that happens to all of us. And he says that the fact is that the very worst thing of all happens to all of us, and that's that we all die. He says in verse 2, it is the same for all, since the same event, meaning death, happens to us all. And the way we live doesn't protect us from this reality. If it did, we could try to change it, but we're helpless to do so. And he goes down a list. He says it happens to the righteous and the unrighteous. and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who doesn't. The good one and the sinner, the same happens to everyone. Regardless of where you stand with God, we all die. And the list could go on. Republican, Democrat, rich, poor, blue collar, white collar. Fill in the blank. After all these years, the mortality rate is still staying steady at 100%. And as he thinks about this fact and he wrestles with this, and we see in verse 3, he grieves over it. He says this is an evil in all that is done under the sun. As one translation puts it, he's saying this is as wrong as anything that happens in this world. He laments over this reality. There's nothing we can do to rescue ourselves from death. And friends, he doesn't sugarcoat things here. He recognizes death for what it is. It's terrible. He doesn't use empty platitudes to try to deal with the topic of death. To the well-organized mind, death is just the next adventure. Sorry for all you Harry Potter fans. No, he calls it for what it is. This is an evil it's worth lamenting over. Death wasn't part of God's good creation of this world, but really is an invasive species. As man fell into sin and rebellion, and with that, death came. And he ties death back to where it came from. And he says in verse 3, also the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. Even if we could somehow save ourselves by how we live, it ultimately wouldn't matter. Although some do live for God and some don't, as we saw on that list just a moment ago, but we're all ultimately sinners. As it says, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts. If you're a child of a man, which is all of us, this is in our hearts. And some hearts may have more evil in them than others, but whether there's 10 drops of ink in your glass of water or 1 drop of ink, it's still inky water. As we know that the wages of sin, what we earn for our sin, is death. And in our sin, we declare ourselves in so many ways to not need God. Essentially in sin, we set ourselves up as God. We know better. Our ideas of how we should live are better than His. And in a punishment that fits the crime, God allows those of us who live as though we were God to see how dispensable we really are. From dust we came, to dust we return. As it says in Romans 5:12, therefore just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. And friends, this is someone who has spent a lot of time, as we've seen in the book of Ecclesiastes, wrestling with this topic of death. In some ways, the whole book of Ecclesiastes, in a sense, is how do you make sense of life when we know this is all going to end? A constant refrain we've heard throughout the book is, all is vanity. And the word vanity, we learned, was translated from the Hebrew word hebel, which literally means a breath or a breeze. It's the author's way of saying that our life is here for a short time and then it vanishes. It's like seeing your breath on a cold winter morning. It's there for a moment and then it's quickly gone. And because of this reality, this presents us with a very real challenge. How can we have joy when we know this is all temporary? How can we have joy when the things we love in life will someday be taken from us? When all that's left is memories of what we once had. As a family, in a few short weeks, we'll be packing up our minivan and heading out for our annual family vacation. It's just something we can't wait for. We as a family love the beach and can't wait to spend about a week down south enjoying the sun and the sand and the water and just spending some time together as a family. And this is an event we looked forward to throughout the year. We kind of count down the days. Oh, it's only 3 more months till vacation. But something, as much as I love the vacation, something I've found that inevitably happens while I'm on vacation, and no matter how great our time is going, is there can be this just underlying nagging feeling that I have to fight throughout the week. And I'll do my best to fight it. But from the moment we get there, there's just this realization in the back of my mind that this is soon going to be over. This vacation will be done soon. This is only temporary. And as we're pulling into our hotel parking lot, inevitably there's always going to be a family that's packing up their minivan. They kind of look like us, and they're getting ready to head back home. And it just reminds me, yeah, that's us soon. Soon we will be packing up our minivan and heading back up 95 to Philly. And it can challenge my enjoyment of my vacation. How can I enjoy this fully knowing it will soon end? And death does the same thing to us. You see, death doesn't just affect us someday. You know, someday when I'm older down the road, that's when I have to deal with death. No, death is something that we live under the shadow of every day. Death brings an impermanence with it to life. As Pastor Matthew Michelot says in his excellent book entitled Remember Death, he says, death spreads its poison through everything we enjoy because nothing we enjoy is ours to keep. Time passes, things change, and eventually everyone loses everything they love. Now, at this moment, you might be thinking, Matt, I was hoping for something uplifting. What's all this talk about death? Can you change the subject? And we're living in the midst of pandemic. I see enough of this already, and I understand that. But friends, in order to really find joy, we need to deal with this reality. You see, most of us cope with the reality of death in either one of two ways. Either we despair over this reality, or we just live in denial of it. The French philosopher Michel de Montaigne captures well this picture of how the reality of death can lead us to despair. He paints a picture. He says to imagine a group of condemned criminals being led on their way to their execution. And on the way to their execution, they're taken to all these fancy houses. They're fed with the finest food, entertained with the best entertainment. All kinds of pleasures are put before them. And the question he poses is, do you think these men can really enjoy all these pleasures that were placed before them, knowing what soon awaits them? No, the knowledge of death ruins these pleasures for them. That's how life can be for us. Knowing we're going to die robs us of the joys that are part of life. And it leads to despair. And because of this, we don't want to deal with these things. So what we often do is we live in denial. It's what Freud argued when he said that in the unconscious, each one of us is convinced of his immortality. There's something in us that can't picture the world existing apart from us. And maybe that's because we filter the world through our own eyes. Leo Tolstoy, in his novel, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, captures this human condition well. The novel describes a process of death for Ivan Ilyich, who's a young, successful man in his mid-40s. And as he's realizing he's dying and he's laying in bed and reflecting on this, he reflects on how he always knew that people die, but it was always in the abstract. But deep down, he thought he was different. He says, it cannot be that I ought to die. That would be too terrible if I had to die. I would have known it was so. An inner voice would have told me so. But there was nothing of the sort in me. And now here it is. It can't be. It's impossible. And as he's going through death and ultimately dies, you see his friends and his family dealing with things the same way. They say, well, death is one of those things that happens to people like Ivan Ilyich, but not to me. And they say, I cannot think of depressing thoughts, and they push them aside. And we can deny the reality of death. We understand it in theory, but we don't really believe it could happen with us. And again, I think that's what our culture does. We kind of out of sight, out of mind. But friends, that's not reality. Death is far too big of a problem to live as if it doesn't exist. And what we see in our text points us to a different way of dealing with death's dilemma. One that doesn't go into despair, one that doesn't stick our heads in the sand and live in denial, but points us to live in a different way, to deal with this in a different way. And we see this in the second point of our text. We looked at joy's challenge first. Look with me now at point 2, joy's confidence. Look with me at verse 4. It says, "But he who is joined with all the living has hope." Notice what he's saying. Notice that word "but" there. What he's saying is, remember everything that was just said. Despite the despair of all people dying, despite the frustration of it all, despite the horror and the grief of death and the sinfulness of sin, he says, he who is joined with all the living has hope. There's still hope. Brothers and sisters, if you're alive today, if you are joined with the living, we don't have to live in despair. We don't have to live in denial. We can live in hope. I'm reminded of the great quote from the movie Shawshank Redemption. "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." We can have hope that joy is possible. We can have confidence that joy is possible. And he tells us how this can be. And he starts off by telling us a proverb. He says, "For a living dog is better than a dead lion." Now, this might have you scratching your head a little bit, wondering, what in the world is he talking about here? You see, back in the culture when this was written, dogs weren't man's best friend like they are today. They were considered more like rodents. Rather than loving dogs, people would view them as worthless animals. They would roam the streets, they'd steal food, eat garbage. Unfortunately, my dog Charlie, I guess that's still in his DNA because he still loves a good feast of garbage every now and then. But on the other hand, it's in contrast with the lion. The lion is the king of the jungle. It's just this majestic, dignified, mighty animal. And what he's saying is it's better to be a worthless creature that's alive than a magnificent creature that's dead. It's better to be alive than dead regardless of your station in life, regardless of your past and how you've lived. It's better to be alive because if you're alive, there's hope. And he tells us why this is the case. How does being alive bring hope? Verse 5, he says, "For the living know that they will die." Now, that doesn't sound very hopeful, does it? Well, what he's saying is the hope the living has is to take the opportunity given to us to consider death, consider our mortality, consider the impermanence of life, and then to live in light of it. Considering death should change the way we live. When we consider death, we live differently. We see life as the gift that it is. We live more intentionally. We don't waste as much time on the trivial. Death reminds us how valuable life is. It reminds us that life is limited, to steward it well, to steward it wisely. The book of Ecclesiastes is what's known as wisdom literature. It teaches us how to live wisely in life. Seeing the brevity of life and living in light of it is just wise living. It's what Moses prayed in Psalm 90, verse 12, a prayer we should really all pray every day. It says, "So teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." We should pray every morning, "Lord, teach me to number my days." There's wisdom in understanding the brevity of our lives and acting accordingly. But here's the problem, friends. This doesn't necessarily solve our problem. Yes, it points us to live in light of this reality, but the reality hasn't changed. We still face death, and it's still terrible. But here's the thing. There's another reason if we are joined with the living, we can have hope. Hundreds of years after the book of Ecclesiastes was written, someone appeared on the scene who completely embodied wisdom. They lived their lives without a moment wasted. They lived in light of their death the way wisdom calls us to, completely and perfectly, knowing their time was short. He lived a life of completely obeying God's commands, including God's command to be joyful that we'll see. He lived a life of joy, so much so that he told his disciples in John 15:11, "These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full." And because this one was not, as we read a moment ago, a child of man with evil and madness in his heart, and as we sang earlier, he was born of a virgin, he didn't have to deal with the sin that was in his own heart and give account for it. So instead, he was able to give account for ours. But then, friends, he did something even greater. He rose from the dead, defeating death, triumphing over the grave. So when we read about the hope available to the living, there's hope that has come not just to learn to kind of live in light of death, but there's one who's done that for us and fundamentally changed the reality of death. As it says in 1 Corinthians 15:20 through 22, "For as by a man came death," talking of Adam, "by a man has also come the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive." And friends, because of Jesus, though death is terrible, it's no longer the final word. And this changes absolutely everything. The joys we experience in this world are now not the only joys we'll experience, but they point us to greater and eternal joys. They point us to our future joy as we become partakers of eternal life. A joy that's so much greater that Paul in Romans 8:18 is able to say, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." Not even worth comparing. A few weeks ago, about a month or so ago, we went camping as a family. It's the first time we've gone camping in a long time, but we did have a great time. We survived. But part of what made camping enjoyable was knowing that it was temporary. We knew life back home is greater. If a storm came through and destroyed our tent, would we be disappointed? Well, yeah, of course we would. Probably not as disappointed as the guy whose tent I borrowed, but still we would be disappointed. Were we enjoying ourselves? Yes, absolutely, we were enjoying ourselves. But home is better. My bed is much more comfortable. We have running water at home. The bathroom's not a mile away. I'd be able to live with the loss of that tent because the tent isn't all there is. There's greater joy beyond camping. But if me and my family lived in that tent year-round, if that was all we have, we'd be far more distraught. News of an incoming storm would cause far more concern, far more worry. But because camping isn't our home but temporary, it actually frees us to enjoy it more. Charles Spurgeon, the 19th century English preacher, says the following. He says, "To be prepared to die is to be prepared to live. To be ready for eternity is in the best sense to be ready for time. Who is so fit to live on earth as the man who is fit to live in heaven? Who has brightness of the eye? Is it not the man who has looked within the gate of pearl and seen his place prepared among the blessed? Who has lightness of heart? Is it not the man who has unloaded his sin and has found mercy through the blood of Christ? Who can go to his bed and sleep in peace and wake with joy? Who but the man that is reconciled to God by the death of his Son? Who has the best of this world as well as the world to come? Is it not he whom death has now become a changed thing?" And friends, death is now a changed thing for us because of what Christ has done. Because of that, we're free to live out God's command for us. And that leads us to our third and final point. Point number 3, joy commanded. Look with me at verse 7. It says, "Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do." Notice there's an urgency to this command. In light of the shortness of life, go. Get going, move. You know, there's this idea our culture has of the bucket list. The things you want to do before you kick the bucket. And this term, you might not realize that this term actually came from a movie back in 2007 entitled The Bucket List. The movie hasn't survived like the term has. And in this movie, you have Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman, and they have both been diagnosed with terminal conditions. And they decide, in light of their impending deaths, they're going to go against doctor's orders, they're going to check themselves out of the hospital, and they're going to go and enjoy and do the stuff they've always wanted to do. So they go skydiving, they visit the Great Wall of China, they go on a safari. They try to squeeze as much enjoyment as they can into the time they have left in life. Well, here the author of Ecclesiastes gives us a sort of bucket list of his own. In light of the fact that our time is short, squeeze as much enjoyment as you can into the time you have left. Here's where he starts. It's not where you'd think. He says, change the way you eat dinner. Enjoy your food and enjoy your drink. He starts with the everyday, mundane stuff of life. In verse 8, he says, let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. This would have been the dress-up clothes of their day. He's saying, go have a dinner party. Enjoy a good meal with good friends. Notice the everyday nature of it all. Let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking, or to say it positively, always have oil on your head. In verse 9, he says to enjoy the companionship God has given us. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain, or there's that word again, or short life. If you're married, enjoy each other every day, all the days of your life. Get off your phones, talk to each other, date each other, go for a walk, invest in your marriage consistently. If you're not married, enjoy the friendships and relationships that God has put in your life. Invest in them, enjoy them. Verse 10, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. We're called to enjoy our work. Do it the best we can. Enjoy what occupies us. You may have heard before the saying or the advice to find a job you enjoy doing and you'll never have to work a day in your life. Well, this kind of flips it on its head a little bit. Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might, and you'll enjoy what you're doing. Whatever work you may currently be occupied with, throw yourself into it. Doesn't mean you can never look for another job, but wherever God has you, do it with all your might while He has you there. And this goes beyond our jobs. It says, whatever your hand finds to do, serve others with joy and excellence. Think about the things you're doing and how to do them better. How can you improve situations? Find ways to improve what occupies you. Maybe as a parent, it's seeking to grow in certain areas of parenting. Think about this in church life. Whatever groups you're a part of, do it with all your might. Be all in. Ask yourself how I can throw myself to help this group be a better group. Maybe it's calling people throughout the week so they feel more relationally connected. This is a calling to thoughtfully engage whatever God has called us to. And He reminds us why. The reason is this is our opportunity. Once it's gone, it's gone. Eternity will be great, but there's certain opportunities that we have now that when they're done, they're done. He says there's no work or thought or knowledge in Sheol where you're going. In other words, while you're living life under the sun, this is your chance to do those things. This is your opportunity. Be all in. And what I love, friends, about this picture of this joyful life is that the writer of Ecclesiastes isn't just saying, yeah, joy is possible out there somewhere, somehow. Go do the big things on your bucket list and you'll experience joy. That cruise you've always wanted to go on, yeah, there's joy to be found there. Get that new house and then you'll finally really experience joy. No, he's saying you can take joy in the mundane stuff right here, right now. This is where most of life is lived, in these mundane moments, in this mundane stuff. And really, the enjoyment of these gifts that God has given us really point us back to why we were created and how we were created in the first place. When we go all the way back to the first opening chapters of the book of Genesis. As we read in Genesis how God created man and woman, we see the delight man takes in his wife. He said, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," he exclaims. And we see the companionship God created for them. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love. We see God in the garden gave man good food to eat, not just so that man can sustain himself, but he gives them food that's enjoyable. He gives them lots of variety. Eat your bread, drink your wine with a merry heart. And we see in the garden, God gave man work to do. He's to tend and keep the garden, to have dominion over what has been entrusted to him. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. In many ways, our enjoying the everyday gifts God has given us is just acknowledging what we are created to be. It's acknowledging that God is the creator and we are the created. It's acknowledging our creatureliness. Author Joe Rigney says the following. He says, "Therefore, to be a creature is to be a receiver. The great privilege of man is to receive everything that God gives in all the ways that he gives it, then to know it and enjoy it and delight in it and sing about it and to know him in it and to enjoy him in it and to sing about him in it." And the writer of Ecclesiastes tells us to enjoy these things because these are gifts from God personally to us. And we can make the mistake of enjoying the gift, but forgetting the one from whom it came. Notice what it says in verse 9. It says, "Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life, that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion." This is what you've been given personally from God. This is your portion. This is your relationships. Your food and drink are gifts from God. And friends, these are gifts that God has given for us to enjoy. God has given us so much to enjoy. But we can so often be fixated on what he hasn't given us. We're called here to enjoy the gifts he's given us already. And friends, while we have to guard our hearts against discontentment and always wanting the next thing and seeking our joy in the lie that we need more and more, we also need to guard ourselves from falling off the other side of the horse. And that's this kind of asceticism that says that I'm not going to enjoy the things of this world or the things that God has given me because they're all temporary. My home is in heaven, therefore I'm not going to find joy in the everyday stuff of life. It's not spiritual enough. I think C.S. Lewis had this type of thinking in mind when he said there's no good trying to be more spiritual than God. And here we see that God points us to enjoy his good gifts. God is the creator of these things. To enjoy good food, to enjoy good relationships, to enjoy our work, to see them as gifts from his hand, to be enjoyed. And I think when we receive gifts from God, I think we honor God in two ways when he gives us these gifts. One is to simply remember where they came from. We give thanks to God for giving these gifts. We let the goodness of the gifts point us to the goodness of the one who gave us these gifts. But the other way we honor God when he gives us gifts is we actually enjoy the gifts he's given us. Thank God for the food before eating it, and maybe even after eating it, but then dig in and enjoy the food. Because as a good father, he delights in our enjoyment. He wants us to enjoy the gifts in and of themselves. I saw a wonderful picture of this in our neighborhood recently. As you know, we've had the privilege to serve our neighborhood by doing a food distribution where we partner with the city and some other different organizations to help feed people in this trying time of need. And recently, we were able to partner with a local school, Kirkbride School, and another organization to be able to give out Easter baskets that weren't able to be given out on Easter. And these Easter baskets had different toys in them, and they had coloring books and different books for older kids to read. And it was just great to watch this, because what was great about it is the parents came up, and we're giving them food to sustain their families, and they were appreciative of the food. But I don't know who was more excited about giving these Easter baskets to their kids, the kids themselves or the parents, knowing the joy that these would bring their kids. There was just, it was so encouraging to see the smiles on these parents' faces. And friends, this is a picture of God. As parents, we take joy in the joy of our children. When I give gifts to my kids, I don't only want them going, "Wow, Dad, you're such a great dad." And don't get me wrong, I do enjoy hearing that. I hope to be a great dad. And gratitude, we should teach our kids gratitude. But as a parent, you find joy in their joy. You want them to genuinely enjoy what you gave them. And God as the creator of these things is glorified when we enjoy them, because he's a father that loves to give good gifts to his children. Brothers and sisters, we have a Father that loves to bring us joy. He loves it so much that here we see he even commands it for us, just in case we don't get the memo. Because of what Christ has done, we have been set free from the fear of death and the bondage of death to enjoy the joy our Father has set for us. In closing, I'm reminded of the hymn from the early 20th century, "My Father's World." And I just want to read it for us as we close. It says, "This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world. The birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world. Listen, he shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass, I hear him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me never forget that though the wrongs seem oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King. Let the heavens ring. God reigns. Let earth be glad. Though the wrongs seem oft so strong, brothers and sisters, God is the ruler yet. This is our Father's world, a Father that loves to bring joy to his children. Let's go, and as it says, be glad. Let's pray.